Welcome. Thanks for joining me. Today's tip is going to be downward facing dog. So how to make the best out of your downward facing dog. So what I suggest is watching this a couple times and then trying it out as you go. Trying the things I say, pause it, give it a little go, try it again, and just keep coming back to that because downward dog is seen all through yoga classes, like no matter what style you do. And it goes there quite a bit, especially for my classes. It's considered a resting pose. But when you're first starting, it definitely does not feel like a resting pose. It feels like you're on your hands and your wrists forever. So you want to make sure your alignment's right. You want to make sure that you're engaging in the right places so that it eventually does become a resting position. So what I'm going to do is start with hand placement, and then we're going to work from there. So the most important part is the foundation of your hands. Your hands should be spread wide. They should be pressing in each of the knuckles on each of your fingers as well as the base of your hand, and your thumb should all be pressing into the mat. A lot of times what tends to happen is that we start to curl up and that palm of our hand starts to suction cup up off the mat. You really want to press down so that then you can find more strength in your arms, not get all that pressure into your wrists. So you want to make sure those are good. And there's a couple different ways your hands can go depending on how your shoulders are. So once you press into your mat, some people feel more comfortable with their hands slightly turned out. Not completely turned out, but just slightly, so that more like their first finger is in line with their shoulders. Some people feel more comfortable with that middle finger in line with their shoulders. And so you just have to kind of play with that and see how it feels best to you. And when you think about your hands shoulder width apart, and when you bring your arms just straight up and then flex your hands forward, that's where your hands should be, right? Not super wide, not super close, but just literally straight up from you. So you can practice that now. So if you have your mat, taking your mat, and then just kind of sit back on your hips and then just kind of reach those arms forward and then rest the hands down. That's probably going to be about shoulder width apart. Shift your weight forward. So then your shoulders and your wrists are in line. You can kind of check and see how your hands line up. Does that first finger line up with your shoulders, or does that middle finger line up? I know I like my middle finger lined up with my shoulders. One thing you want to check is your wrist crease. So this little part here as you're coming down, that little wrinkle there, that wrist crease should always be pointing toward the top of your mat. So not in, not out. So that's a good indication of maybe which finger is lined up with your shoulder. So you're checking that wrist crease is lined up with the top of your mat. Now this is your foundation. So spread the fingers wide, press in almost like gripping that mat with your fingertips, and plant those hands. From here, you're going to straighten the legs to plank. So if you can't quite do plank all the way, let those knees drop. So just come to plank for a moment and then let the knees drop. When you let the knees drop, keep the hips slightly forward so you have some weight in your hands to begin. And then from here, you're going to press back, straighten those arms, and then start to lift the hips. Keep pressing into those hands. So you want to send your hips back. You don't want to send them up to the ceiling. That's going to be too much weight in your hands. And then press down into those hands equally. Press down into the palms. And just take a look at those hands. Notice my knees are bent here, so I'm taking it out of the hamstrings. Keep my knees bent for a minute. Press in, let the neck grow long, let the shoulders draw away from the ears, draw up through the lower belly, and now maybe start to straighten the legs. If you start to straighten the legs and you notice you kind of round in the spine, keep the knees bent. It's way better to have a bent knee, downward facing dog. Notice my back's nice and long here as I press, rather than straightening my legs and rounding in my upper back and feeling really heavy in my wrists. So over time, keep lifting those hips. You might come up higher onto your tiptoes, and then over time, maybe those heels start to press back. Now take a peek at the feet. Your feet are hip distance apart. That means your second toe is in line with your hip bone, and that your heels are pressing straight back. So whether your knees are bent or straight, you're imagining you're sending those inner thighs to the back wall. So your heels press back, tailbone lifts, lower belly draws in, and then that sideways from your shoulder all the way to your hip bone is growing longer. So that's the key to downward facing dog, is growing it back and then eventually growing those heels to the floor. Once you're there, shoulders relax, neck grows long, and your breath grows full. Good, one more full inhale here. Exhale. Inhale, bring the knees down. Exhale, come to child's pose for a moment. Kind of check out, turn those palms up, and just notice how the wrists feel. If they feel like there's a lot of pressure in them, maybe bend your knees this next round. So we'll try one more time. And really making sure that once you have your foundation with your hands, only move from your feet if you feel like you're too short or too long. All right? So from here, come back. Ground down into those hands, spread them wide. Shoulders right over those wrists. And a good indication of what's a good length is you should be able to lift up from plank pose straight to downward dog. And that should be about right for you. If anything, maybe walk the feet in an inch or two. That's the most. So I have my foundation set. My legs are going to go long. Even if you can't quite straighten both legs to hold plank, straighten one leg. And then start to press into those hands, lift the hips, and then take that second leg off the ground. So then you'll notice that leg that was straight will kind of walk in a little bit. And then press into the hands. Bend the knees to start. I always do that every time I practice. I press in, my neck grows long, my tailbone lifts, lower belly draws in, so I'm nice and long through the spine, and then I start to straighten my legs back. Notice my heels don't touch. I don't want my heels to touch. There are some people that say that your heels should touch, but I always feel if my heels touch, then I have nowhere left for my hamstrings to lengthen. So I like to have a little bit of space, so I'm always reaching back for that mat as I continue lifting my hips. One more full inhale here. Exhale. Inhale, brings the knees down. Exhale, come back to child's pose. Turn those palms up. Take a moment. And then slowly lift the chest. So thanks for tuning in. Hopefully that helps you a little bit with your downward facing dog. Leave me any comments below if I need any clarifications that you need answered. And practice with mindfulness, placing those hands mindfully each time, stepping back to plank, then lifting the hips. That's just going to help build your practice, build that mindfulness of your body, how things are feeling in your body, and it's going to help you see that growth a little bit faster, those improvements a little bit sooner than you would if you weren't being mindful. So thanks again for tuning in. I appreciate that you're watching. Eat lots of veggies, drink some water, wear some sunblock. We'll see you next time. Namaste.